The autumn evening was settling in as Dr. Michelle Richardson finished her last rounds at Metro General Hospital. Her dark blue scrubs rustled softly as she walked through the quiet hallways, her stethoscope still hanging around her neck. It had been another long day of back-to-back surgeries, but she felt satisfied knowing she had helped save 2 lives. As she entered her office, Michelle caught her reflection in the window. At 42, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had worked hard to earn her position as one of the city's top cardiothoracic surgeons. Her natural hair was neatly braided, and despite the exhaustion of a 12-hour shift, her dark eyes remained alert and focused. Gathering her belongings, Michelle checked her phone and saw 3 missed calls from her husband, Marcus. She smiled, knowing he was probably worried about her working late again. Marcus had recently accepted the position as the city's new chief of police, making history as the first black police chief in the department's 125-year history. They hadn't seen much of each other in the past 2 weeks since his appointment, both busy with their demanding careers. I should pick up something special for dinner, Michelle thought, deciding to stop at Hartley's, an upscale market in the wealthy Spring Valley neighborhood. Although it wasn't on her usual road home, they carried Marcus's favorite imported cheese and wine. She wanted to celebrate his new position properly, even if it was a bit delayed. The drive to Spring Valley took her through tree-lined streets where massive colonial homes sat back from the road, their windows glowing warmly in the growing darkness. Mitchell noticed she was one of the few black people driving through the area at this hour, but she had grown used to being the only one in many spaces throughout her career. Hartley's Market stood out with its sophisticated brick facade and carefully arranged window displays. The parking lot was half empty when Michelle pulled in with her black Mercedes SUV. She had bought the car last year after making partner at her medical practice, though Marcus had teased her about being too practical with the color choice. Inside the store, Michelle grabbed a shopping cart and began selecting items: fresh pasta, organic vegetables, aged cheese, and a bottle of Marcus's favorite Cabernet. The store's soft classical music played overhead as she moved through the aisles, occasionally checking her shopping list on her phone. A few other shoppers wandered the store, mostly well-dressed women who seemed to be picking up last-minute dinner items. At the cheese counter, an elderly white woman in expensive clothing stepped away from Michelle slightly, clutching her purse closer. Michelle pretended not to notice, maintaining her professional demeanor as she ordered the imported Gruyere. After 15 years as a surgeon in this city, such small acts of prejudice barely registered anymore. As she went through the checkout line, Michelle chatted pleasantly with the young cashier, Sarah, who commented on her choice of wine. "This is one of our best sellers," Sarah said, carefully wrapping the bottle. "You have excellent taste." Michelle smiled, appreciating the girl's friendly manner and genuine service. Leaving the store, Michelle walked to her car with her shopping bags, her heels clicking against the asphalt. The evening had grown cooler, and she looked forward to getting home. The parking lot lights cast long shadows as she loaded the groceries into her SUV's trunk, arranging them carefully so nothing would spill during the drive. What Michelle didn't notice were the 2 police cruisers that had just pulled into the parking lot. Officers James Sullivan and Brett Cooper had received a vague report about suspicious activity in the area, and they were conducting what they called a routine patrol. Both officers were relatively new to the force, having served just under 5 years each, and were eager to make names for themselves. From their perspective, they saw what they had been conditioned to view as suspicious: a black person loading items into an expensive vehicle in an upscale neighborhood after dark. They didn't see the successful surgeon, the loving wife, or their new boss's spouse. They saw what their biases told them to see: a potential threat. As Michelle closed her trunk and prepared to enter her car, she was unaware that this normal evening was about to turn into something that would shake the entire police department and community to its core. The simple act of grocery shopping while black was about to become another chapter in America's ongoing struggle with racial profiling and police misconduct. Officers Sullivan and Cooper circled their patrol car through the Hartley's Market parking lot, their headlights off. Sullivan, a 28-year-old officer with sandy blonde hair, nudged his partner. "Let's check this one out," he said, pointing toward Michelle's Mercedes SUV. Cooper, slightly older at 32, nodded in agreement. Michelle had just reached for her car door handle when the patrol car's lights suddenly flashed on, bathing the area in red and blue. She squinted, raising her hand to shield her eyes from the bright lights. Before she could process what was happening, two white officers approached her from both sides. "Ma'am, step away from the vehicle," Officer Sullivan commanded, his hand resting on his holstered weapon. His voice was loud and authoritative, cutting through the quiet evening air. Michelle's heart began to race, but years of handling emergency surgeries had taught her to stay calm under pressure. "Is there a problem, officers?" Michelle asked, keeping her voice steady and professional. She maintained her position, one hand still on her car door. The security lights from Hartley's cast long shadows across the parking lot, where a few curious shoppers had stopped to watch the scene unfold. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in this area," Officer Cooper said, moving closer. "Could you explain what you're doing here?" His tone suggested she had no right to be in this neighborhood, despite having just walked out of the store with clearly marked shopping bags. "I just finished shopping," Michelle replied calmly, gesturing toward her grocery bags visible through the SUV's window. "I have my receipt right here." She slowly reached for her purse to retrieve it. "Keep your hands where we can see them," Sullivan barked, his hand tightening on his weapon. Michelle froze, her years of professional experience warring with rising fear. She could feel her pulse pounding in her ears but forced herself to remain composed. "Officers, I'm Dr. Michelle Richardson. I just got off work at Metro General and stopped for groceries." She spoke clearly and professionally, hoping they would recognize her name or at least her title. "My ID is in my purse. May I show it to you?" The officers exchanged skeptical looks. "A doctor, huh?" Cooper said with obvious disbelief. "And I suppose this is your car, too." His sarcasm was clear as he walked around the Mercedes, shining his flashlight through the windows. "Yes, it is my car," Michelle confirmed, fighting to keep her voice level. "If you'll allow me to show you my identification." "We've had several reports of high-end vehicle theft in this area," Sullivan interrupted. "And someone matching your description was seen acting suspiciously." Michelle felt her professional calm beginning to crack. "What description exactly?" she asked, knowing full well what they meant but wanting them to say it out loud. A small crowd had gathered near the store's entrance, several people now recording with their phones. "Ma'am, we're going to need to search your vehicle," Cooper announced, ignoring her question. "Do you have anything in there we should know about?" "I do not consent to a search," Michelle stated firmly, remembering her husband's lessons about knowing her rights. "I've done nothing wrong, and you have no probable cause." This seemed to anger the officers. Sullivan stepped closer, his face hardening. "Your lack of cooperation is making us suspicious, ma'am. Step aside." "I will not," Michelle replied, standing her ground. "This is harassment, and I'm well aware of my rights. I would like to speak to your supervisor." In response, Sullivan grabbed Michelle's arm roughly, spinning her around to face her car. "You're interfering with a police investigation," he growled, reaching for his handcuffs. "Put your hands behind your back." "This is assault," Michelle said loudly, making sure the gathering crowd could hear. "I am a respected surgeon, and you have no right." "You have the right to remain silent," Cooper began reciting, as Sullivan roughly handcuffed her. The cold metal bit into her wrists, a shocking contrast to the surgical instruments she had held just hours before. As they led her toward the patrol car, Michelle held her head high, even as she saw her groceries being carelessly dumped onto the parking lot asphalt during their vehicle search. She knew this moment would change everything, not just for her, but for the entire police department. What these officers didn't realize was that they had just handcuffed their new boss's wife, and this mistake would have consequences far beyond this parking lot. The back seat of the police cruiser was cold and uncomfortable as Michelle sat with her hands cuffed behind her. Through the window, she could see officers Sullivan and Cooper roughly searching through her Mercedes, pulling out her medical files and tossing them carelessly onto the wet pavement. Her dinner plans for Marcus were now scattered across the parking lot, the wine bottle broken and leaking red across the asphalt. Sarah, the young cashier who had helped Michelle earlier, stood at the store entrance with her phone raised, recording everything. Several other witnesses had gathered as well, their phones capturing the scene. Michelle knew these videos would be important later, so she made sure to sit up straight and remain dignified, even as her shoulders ached from the tight handcuffs. "Found anything suspicious yet?" Officer Sullivan called out to his partner, loud enough for the crowd to hear. He was trying to justify their actions to the onlookers. Cooper emerged from the Mercedes, holding Michelle's hospital ID badge and her medical license. His face showed the first signs of uncertainty. She really is a doctor, he said, his voice lower now. Could be fake, Sullivan replied quickly, but Michelle could hear the doubt creeping into his voice. Keep searching. She must be hiding something. An older white woman stepped forward from the crowd. It was the same woman who had clutched her purse closer in the store earlier. Officers, she called out. I was shopping with her in Hartley's. She paid for everything. I saw her at the checkout. Sullivan waved her away. Ma'am, please step back. This is police business. But more voices joined in from the crowd. I saw her in surgery last month. Another witness called out. She saved my husband's life. Inside the police car, Michelle closed her eyes and took deep breaths. As a surgeon, she had learned to stay calm in crisis situations. She thought about Marcus, probably still in his office at the police headquarters, unaware that his officers were currently violating his wife's civil rights. Officer Cooper approached the police car and opened the back door. Dr. Richardson, he said, his tone notably different now. Can you explain why you're in this neighborhood? Michelle looked him directly in the eyes. I already told you, she replied calmly. I was shopping for groceries after my shift. I have constitutional rights, and you're violating them. I want to make my phone call, and I want to speak to your supervisor. Listen, Cooper said, lowering his voice, if you cooperate, maybe we can work something out. Work something out? Michelle's voice was clear and steady. You've illegally searched my vehicle, damaged my property, and arrested me without cause. Everything that happens now will be handled through proper channels. Sullivan appeared behind Cooper, his face red with frustration. She's trying to make this into a race thing, he muttered to his partner. We're just doing our jobs. A news van pulled into the parking lot, its lights illuminating the scene. Someone in the crowd must have called the local station. Mitchell recognized the reporter stepping out. She had operated on the woman's father last year. Officers, the reporter called out, walking quickly toward them with a microphone extended. Can you explain why you're arresting Dr. Michelle Richardson, wife of Police Chief Marcus Richardson? The effect of these words was immediate. Both officers froze. Sullivan's face went pale, and Cooper took an involuntary step backward. The name Richardson finally connected in their minds, and the full weight of their mistake crashed down on them. Wife of Chief Richardson, Sullivan repeated weakly. Michelle spoke up from the back seat, her voice carrying clearly in the now quiet parking lot. Yes, officers. Chief Richardson is my husband. Now, would you like to continue violating my civil rights in front of these news cameras, or would you prefer to remove these handcuffs and contact your supervisor? The crowd had grown larger, and many were shaking their heads in disbelief. Sarah, the cashier, had moved closer with her phone still recording. I have the whole thing on video, she announced. From the moment they approached her. Officers Sullivan and Cooper looked at each other, the realization of their massive mistake evident on their faces. They had racially profiled and arrested their new chief's wife, and it was all caught on camera. What had started as a routine patrol had turned into a career-defining disaster, and the night was far from over. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the police station as officers Sullivan and Cooper led Michelle through the main entrance. The night shift desk sergeant, a veteran named Mike Thompson, looked up from his paperwork. His eyes widened as he recognized Michelle from the department's family photographs. She had stood beside Chief Richardson during his swearing-in ceremony just 2 weeks ago. What in God's name? Sergeant Thompson muttered, rising quickly from his desk. Michelle's professional attire and hospital ID badge, still hanging around her neck, stood in stark contrast to typical arrestees. The handcuffs on her wrists looked especially out of place. Sergeant, Michelle said calmly, before either officer could speak, I'd like to make my phone call, and I need medical attention. Officer Sullivan's rough handling has injured my wrist. She turned slightly, showing where the too tight handcuffs had left marks on her skin. Thompson's face darkened as he looked at Sullivan and Cooper. Both officers suddenly seemed very interested in their shoes. Remove those cuffs, Thompson ordered. Now. As Cooper fumbled with the handcuff keys, the station's front doors burst open again. The reporter from the parking lot, Lisa Chen, walked in with her cameraman. Sergeant Thompson, she called out. Would you care to comment on why your officers arrested Chief Richardson's wife while she was grocery shopping? Thompson's face went from red to purple. He turned to Sullivan. Is this true? Did you arrest her at Hartley's Market? We'd had reports of suspicious activity in the area, Sullivan began, his voice shaky. We didn't know who she was. Didn't know who she was. Michelle interrupted, rubbing her sore wrists. You didn't know because you never let me show you my ID. You saw a black woman loading groceries into an expensive car and made assumptions. The station had grown quiet. Other officers and staff had stopped their work to watch the scene unfold. In the corner, a young rookie was frantically typing on his phone, likely alerting others about what was happening. Dr. Richardson, Sergeant Thompson said, his voice professionally calm, but with an edge of anger, please come to my office. We'll make your call there. He turned to the officers. You two, wait here. Don't move, don't speak to anyone, and start writing your reports. Every detail. In Thompson's office, Michelle sat in a comfortable chair while the sergeant himself dialed the chief's number. Her hands were shaking slightly now, the adrenaline of the incident wearing off. A female officer had brought her a cup of tea and retrieved her purse and medical files from her car. Chief, Thompson said into the phone, his face grim, you need to come to the station right away. There's been an incident involving Dr. Richardson. He listened for a moment. Yes, sir, she's safe, but you'll want to handle this personally. While they waited, Sullivan and Cooper sat at their desks, frantically writing their reports. Mitchell could see them through the office window, watching as they repeatedly crossed out lines and started over, trying to justify their actions on paper. Other officers in the station kept their distance, but Michelle could hear their whispered conversations. Some defended their colleagues, saying they were just doing their job. Others shook their heads in disgust, knowing this incident would damage the department's already fragile relationship with the black community. Lisa Chen and her cameraman remained in the lobby, filming everything. The story was already spreading across social media. Videos from the parking lot were being shared thousands of times. Michelle's phone, recently returned to her, was flooded with messages from colleagues at the hospital and friends checking on her. Your husband is 3 minutes out, Thompson informed her, hanging up another call. Dr. Richardson, I want you to know. This isn't what our department stands for. Not anymore. Not under Chief Richardson's leadership. Michelle nodded, still maintaining her composure. What your department stands for, Sergeant, will be demonstrated by how it handles this incident. She looked out at Sullivan and Cooper, still struggling with their reports. Those officers didn't just arrest me tonight. They arrested a symbol of every black person who's been profiled, harassed, or wrongly accused. How you handle this will show whether you really want things to change. The station's back door opened, and hurried footsteps approached. Mitchell stood, knowing it was Marcus. The real work, the hard conversations, the policy changes, the departmental reforms, was about to begin, and she was ready for it. Chief Marcus Richardson's footsteps echoed through the suddenly silent police station as he strode toward Sergeant Thompson's office. At 6'2", with broad shoulders and graying temples, his presence commanded immediate respect. But tonight, there was something different in his walk, a mixture of personal anger and professional determination. The officers who had been lingering in the hallway quickly disappeared into other rooms. Sullivan and Cooper, still at their desks, seemed to shrink in their chairs as their chief passed by. Only Lisa Chen and her cameraman held their ground, capturing every moment. When Marcus entered Thompson's office and saw Michelle, his professional mask cracked slightly. The sight of the marks on her wrists made his jaw tighten. Are you okay? He asked softly, his deep voice carrying a tremor of controlled rage. I'm fine, Marcus, Michelle replied, standing to meet him. For a moment, they weren't chief and doctor, but husband and wife. He gently took her hands, examining her wrists, then turned to Sergeant Thompson. Walk me through it, Marcus ordered, his voice now pure steel. Every detail. Thompson gestured to the security footage playing on his computer screen. It's all here, sir, plus about 20 witness videos from the parking lot. Officers Sullivan and Cooper approached Dr. Richardson without cause, escalated the situation unnecessarily, conducted an illegal search, and made an unlawful arrest. Marcus watched the footage, his expression growing darker with each passing moment. On the screen, he could see his wife being handcuffed, his officers tossing her medical documents onto the wet pavement, her groceries, meant for their dinner, scattered across the parking lot. "Where are they?" Marcus asked quietly. "Still writing their reports, sir," Thompson replied. "They'd gone through several drafts, trying to," he trailed off, not wanting to say justify their actions out loud. Marcus straightened his uniform and adjusted his badge. "Michelle," he said, turning to his wife, "I need to handle this as chief first. Can you give me a moment?" Michelle nodded, understanding the delicate balance he needed to maintain. She had seen that same look of controlled professionalism in the mirror many times before difficult surgeries. Marcus stepped out of the office and approached Sullivan and Cooper's desks. The entire station held its breath. Even Lisa Chen lowered her microphone, respecting the gravity of the moment. "Officers," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent room. "In my first 2 weeks as chief, I spoke about change, about building trust, about seeing everyone in our community as people first." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Tonight, you didn't see a person. You saw a profile, a stereotype. You saw what your biases told you to see." Sullivan started to speak, but Marcus held up his hand. "Don't. There's nothing you can write in those reports that will justify what happened tonight. You didn't know she was my wife. That's not the point. The point is, it shouldn't matter whose wife she is." Cooper's face had gone pale. "Chief, we were just following protocol for suspicious." "Suspicious?" Marcus's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Shopping at a grocery store is suspicious? Driving a nice car is suspicious? Or is it just suspicious when a black person does these things?" The silence in the station was deafening. Several officers had tears in their eyes, others looked ashamed, and a few nodded in agreement with their chief's words. "As of this moment," Marcus continued, "you are both on administrative leave pending a full investigation. But tomorrow morning, I want you back here, in civilian clothes, to begin intensive bias training. What happened tonight will become a teaching moment for this entire department." He turned to address the whole station. "That goes for everyone. Starting tomorrow, we're implementing new training protocols. Every officer will learn to recognize their biases and understand the damage they cause. What happened to Dr. Richardson tonight has happened to countless others who didn't have a chief for a husband. That ends now." Marcus walked back to Thompson's office, where Michelle stood in the doorway. The entire station watched as he took her hand, their private gesture of support becoming a public symbol of the changes to come. "Let's go home," he said softly to Michelle, then turned to Thompson. "Sergeant, start the paperwork. Tomorrow, we begin fixing this department's broken pieces." The morning after the incident, Michelle's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Videos of her arrest had gone viral overnight. Local news stations were playing the footage on repeat, and social media was exploding with hashtags like #ShoppingWhileBlack and #DeRichardsonStrong. By 9 a.m., the story had reached national news networks. Michelle sat in her home office, watching multiple news channels on her tablet while responding to messages. Her hospital colleagues had sent a joint letter of support, and patients were calling to share their own stories of racial profiling. Even the elderly woman from Hartley's Market, who had clutched her purse away from Michelle, had sent an apologetic email through the hospital's contact system. In the kitchen, Marcus was on his third cup of coffee, handling one crisis call after another. The mayor had called twice, the police union representatives were demanding a meeting, and civil rights organizations were requesting interviews. His newly pressed uniform hung ready on a door, but he hadn't put it on yet. "The press conference is in 2 hours," Michelle reminded him, walking into the kitchen. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, feeling the tension there. "Are you sure you want me to speak?" Marcus looked up from his phone. "You're the victim here, Michelle, but you're also a respected surgeon, a community leader, and my wife. Your voice matters more than mine right now." The doorbell rang. It was Sarah, the young cashier from Hartley's Market, clutching a USB drive. "I have the store's security footage," she said nervously. "It shows everything from inside the store, too. How you paid for everything, how polite you were. I thought it might help." Michelle invited her in, and Sarah burst into tears. "I'm so sorry I didn't do more to help," she sobbed. "I just kept filming, but I should have spoken up sooner." "You did exactly the right thing," Michelle assured her. That video evidence is crucial. She made Sarah some tea, listening as the young woman shared how the incident had opened her eyes to everyday racism. At police headquarters, Sergeant Thompson was dealing with a different kind of aftermath. Officers Sullivan and Cooper sat in the conference room, watching their body camera footage with department attorneys. Both officers looked like they hadn't slept. "Just tell us how to fix this," Sullivan said, his voice hoarse. "We'll do whatever it takes." Thompson looked at them sternly. "Fix this? You can't just fix racism with an apology and some training videos. But you can learn from it. You can change. That's what the chief is offering you, a chance to be part of the solution instead of the problem." By noon, the police station's front lawn was packed with reporters and protesters. Signs ranged from "Justice for Dr. Richardson" to "Reform the Police" to "Black Excellence Matters." The crowd parted as Marcus and Michelle arrived, both looking professional and composed. At the podium, Marcus spoke first about departmental changes, mandatory bias training, community oversight committees, and new protocols for stops and searches. Then Michelle stepped forward. The crowd fell silent. "Last night," she began, her voice clear and strong, "I was just a woman trying to buy groceries for dinner, but I was seen as a suspect because of my skin color. This isn't new. This isn't unique. This happens every day to Black people across America." She paused, looking directly into the cameras. "I'm fortunate. I'm a doctor. I'm married to the police chief. My wrongful arrest was captured on video and witnessed by dozens. But what about those without titles, without cameras, without witnesses? Who speaks for them?" In the back of the crowd, Officers Sullivan and Cooper stood in civilian clothes, listening. Their faces showed a mix of shame and dawning understanding. Beside them, Sarah from Hartley's Market wiped tears from her eyes. "I'm not calling for these officers to be fired," Michelle continued. "I'm calling for them to be educated. I'm calling for them to understand why their actions were wrong. I'm calling for real change." Marcus stepped back to the podium, standing beside his wife. "Starting today," he announced, "this department will work to earn the trust of every community member. What happened to Dr. Richardson was a wake-up call. Now we must answer it." As they finished speaking, the crowd erupted in applause. Phones captured every moment, sending the message across the nation. In the station, officers watched on monitors, some nodding in agreement, others shifting uncomfortably. Change was coming to the department, whether they were ready or not. 1 week after the incident, the police department's largest conference room was filled to capacity. Officers Sullivan and Cooper sat in the front row, along with 20 other officers selected for the first round of intensive bias training. Michelle stood at the podium, no longer as a victim, but as a teacher. "Before I was handcuffed in that parking lot," she began, clicking to the first slide showing the security footage, "I was just like any of your wives, sisters, or mothers shopping for dinner. The only difference was the color of my skin." The room was silent. Some officers couldn't look at the screen, while others took careful notes. In the back, Marcus watched with pride as his wife turned a painful experience into a powerful lesson. "Today, we're going to watch every minute of what happened," Michelle continued. "Not to shame anyone, but to understand, to learn, to change." She turned to Sullivan and Cooper. "Officers, would you like to share what you were thinking when you first saw me at my car?" Sullivan stood slowly, his voice shaking. "I saw an expensive car in a wealthy neighborhood. I saw a Black person loading bags late in the evening. I didn't see a doctor. I didn't see a human being just living her life. I saw what my biases told me to see, a suspect." Cooper nodded in agreement. "We were so sure we were right. We couldn't even follow basic protocol. We didn't ask for ID. We didn't listen. We just acted on assumptions." As the training session progressed, other officers shared similar experiences. A Black officer spoke about being stopped while off duty in his own neighborhood. A female officer described the discrimination she faced within the force. The room became a space for honest, difficult conversations. Meanwhile, in another part of the building, Sergeant Thompson was reviewing new department policies with the Community Oversight Board. Sarah, the cashier from Hartley's Market, had been invited to join, along with other community members of various backgrounds. "Each stop must now be documented with clear probable cause," Thompson explained. "Body cameras must be activated before approaching anyone. And most importantly, officers must complete bias recognition training before any public interaction. The internal affairs investigation had been thorough. Sullivan and Cooper's previous arrests were being reviewed, revealing a pattern of disproportionate stops involving people of color. But instead of termination, they had chosen the path of reform, becoming part of the department's new training program. Back in the training room, Michelle played the viral videos from different angles. "Look at the bystanders," she instructed. Some filmed, some spoke up, some stayed silent. What would you do if you witnessed this happening to someone else? An older officer raised his hand. "I've been on the force 30 years, he said. "We were taught to trust our instincts, but maybe our instincts were wrong. Maybe they were taught to us by a system that needs to change." During the lunch break, Michelle found Sullivan and Cooper waiting to speak with her. Their faces showed the weight of their actions and their struggle to change. "Dr. Richardson," Sullivan began, "we've been doing this job wrong for years. Not just with you, with everyone who looks like you. We can't undo what we did. We want to help make sure it never happens again." Michelle looked at these two officers, no longer the aggressive men from the parking lot, but humans struggling to unlearn years of bias. "That's why I'm here," she replied, "not for revenge, but for change." In his office, Marcus reviewed the department's progress report. Complaints of racial profiling had decreased since implementing the new protocols. Body camera footage was being reviewed regularly. Community trust was slowly rebuilding. The story had created ripples beyond their city. Other police departments were requesting copies of their training program. Civil rights organizations were using the incident as a case study. Michelle had been invited to speak at police academies across the country. As the training session ended, Michelle showed one final slide, a recent photograph from Hartley's Market. It showed her shopping alongside Sullivan's wife and Cooper's mother, all three women laughing together. The image represented something powerful. Change was possible, one person at a time. "This isn't just about police training," Michelle concluded. "This is about seeing each other's humanity. It's about understanding that what happened to me happens every day to people who don't have my platform. And it's about deciding, together, to do better." 6 months after the incident at Hartley's Market, the police department's community room was decorated for a special ceremony. Photographs lined the walls, images showing the journey from that fateful night to today. The largest photo showed Michelle and Marcus Richardson standing with officers Sullivan and Cooper at a recent community outreach event. Michelle sat in the front row, wearing her surgical scrubs as she had just finished an emergency heart surgery. Next to her sat Sarah from Hartley's Market, now the youngest member of the Police Community Advisory Board. The room was filled with officers, community members, and media representatives. Chief Richardson stood at the podium, his badge gleaming under the lights. 6 months ago, he began, our department faced a moment of crisis. Today, we celebrate not just change, but transformation. The statistics displayed on the screen behind him told the story. Racial profiling complaints down by 70%, community trust ratings up by 60%, and over 200 officers successfully completing the new bias training program. But the numbers weren't the whole story. Officer Sullivan, now wearing a training instructor's badge, stepped forward to speak. "When I wrongfully arrested Dr. Richardson, I thought my career was over," he admitted. "Instead, she showed me a different path, the path to becoming a better officer and a better human being." In the audience, Sullivan's teenage daughter beamed with pride. She had recently started a social justice club at her high school, inspired by her father's transformation. Next to her sat Cooper's mother, who had become a regular volunteer at community police events. Michelle walked to the podium next, her surgical cap still on. "Last week, I performed heart surgery on a young man," she shared. "As I was scrubbing in, I recognized him. He had been one of the protesters outside the police station 6 months ago. When he woke up, he told me something remarkable." She paused, looking around the room. "He said that seeing how our community handled that incident gave him hope. Not because it was perfect, but because we chose to learn from it, to grow from it, to change because of it." The ceremony continued with presentations of new community policing initiatives. Officer Cooper, standing with a group of rookie officers he now mentored, explained their Coffee with a Cop program at Hartley's Market, the same store where the incident began. Sarah stepped up to share how the store had become a model for community police relations. Now, when our customers see officers in the store, they don't feel fear, she said. They see friends, protectors, members of our community. The department's training program, developed with Michelle's help, had gained national recognition. Police departments from across the country were sending officers to learn their methods. The Richardson model, as it was now called, was being studied in police academies. Sergeant Thompson, recently promoted to captain, presented data showing how the new protocols had improved police community relations. We don't just enforce the law anymore, he explained. We build trust, one interaction at a time. Near the end of the ceremony, a surprise guest spoke, the elderly woman who had clutched her purse away from Michelle that night. I was part of the problem, she admitted tearfully. My biases, my fears, my prejudices. But watching Dr. Richardson turn injustice into inspiration showed me that it's never too late to change. Marcus closed the ceremony by announcing new initiatives. A scholarship program for minority youth interested in law enforcement, expanded mental health response teams, and a citizen review board with real oversight power. As people mingled afterward, Michelle watched Sullivan and Cooper playing with their children in the community room. These were not the same officers who had handcuffed her 6 months ago. They were changed men, changed officers, changed humans. Ready to go home? Marcus asked, joining her. You've been up since that emergency surgery at 4 a.m. Michelle smiled, watching Sarah take a selfie with some rookie officers. Almost, she replied. I just want to enjoy this moment a little longer. Outside, the evening was similar to that night 6 months ago, but everything was different now. In the parking lot, officers chatted with community members. Inside Hartley's market down the street, customers of all races shopped without fear. And in the police department, a new generation of officers was learning to see people first, not profiles. The incident that could have torn their community apart had instead brought them together, proving that sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best changes, if people are willing to learn, to grow, and to see each other's humanity.